Imagine your home, your sanctuary, violated by those who claim to protect it. A single act of heartless destruction ignites a firestorm, revealing a truth no one expected. You won't believe the secret a community tried to bury, and the powerful forces it unleashed. Don't miss what happens next when a simple ramp becomes the battleground for dignity. The air in the esteemed Oak Haven Estates community usually hummed with the gentle murmur of well-maintained sprinklers and the distant thud of tennis balls on impeccably manicured courts. Today, however, a guttural roar ripped through the tranquil facade, an affront to the carefully cultivated peace. A gleaming yellow excavator, a monstrous anomaly in this idyllic setting, sat poised on Rachel Monroe's front lawn, its steel claw hovering menacingly over the precisely built wheelchair ramp leading to her porch. The sun, usually a benevolent presence, glinted off its metallic surfaces, turning the scene into a stark, almost apocalyptic tableau. Rachel Monroe, a woman whose name once resonated with power and purpose across the entire state, now sat in her customized ergonomic wheelchair on the pristine paving stones of her driveway, a thin silk scarf doing little to conceal the tremor in her hands. Her gaze, usually sharp and penetrating, was clouded with a mixture of disbelief and simmering fury. This was her home, her sanctuary, the place she had painstakingly adapted to rebuild her life after the accident that had curtailed her storied career. The ramp, a symbol of her resilience and independence, was about to be obliterated. Standing opposite her, arms crossed over her chest, was Linda Cartwright, the formidable president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. Linda, a woman whose perfectly coiffed blonde hair and impeccably tailored suit belied a spirit as rigid and unyielding as concrete, offered no apology, no explanation. Her face was a mask of self-righteous authority, her thin lips set in a disapproving line. She carried herself with the unwavering conviction of someone who believed herself to be the sole arbiter of taste and order in Oak Haven. For months, Rachel had received increasingly terse, formal letters from the HOA, each one signed by Linda, citing vague aesthetic violations and demanding the rectification of her ramp. Rachel had attempted to engage, to explain the necessity, the legal protections afforded to individuals with disabilities, but each effort was met with an impenetrable wall of bureaucratic disdain. She had even provided detailed documentation of the ramp's compliance with building codes and accessibility standards. The Fair Housing Act dictates that HOAs must permit reasonable modifications for disabled residents, so long as they are consistent with building codes and safety and do not prevent reasonable passage by other residents. Yet, Linda Cartwright seemed intent on proving that Oak Haven Estates existed in a legal vacuum. Ms. Monroe, as per our bylaws in the unanimous decision of the HOA board, the structure is deemed aesthetically incompatible with the architectural integrity of Oak Haven Estates, Linda declared, her voice clipped and devoid of warmth, projecting an air of unquestionable finality. Its presence detracts from the property value of the entire block. We regret to inform you that we have no choice but to proceed with its immediate removal. Rachel's voice, though softer than it once was, still carried an echo of the commanding presence that had once filled legislative halls. Immediate removal. Linda, without so much as a proper notice, without a single conversation, without any acknowledgement of the federal and state laws that protect individuals with disabilities. Her tone was laced with an incredulity that bordered on contempt. This is not merely an aesthetic choice. This is an essential accommodation. You are stripping away my independence, violating my rights. HOAs cannot forbid the construction of a wheelchair ramp, as that would violate the Fair Housing Act, though they can dictate its appearance. Linda's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Notice was given, Ms. Monroe, multiple times. Your refusal to comply left us with no alternative. Oak Haven Estates prides itself on its pristine appearance and uniform standards. This ramp is an unsightly blight, and frankly, your continued insistence on its presence has made you an inconvenient resident. The phrase, delivered with a saccharine smile, hung in the air like a poisoned dart. The implicit message was clear: Rachel's disability was an inconvenience, her needs secondary to the HOA's rigid vision of suburban perfection. Linda's conviction that the ramp diminished the value of the home was a common concern cited by HOAs, though ultimately, disability rights typically outweigh such concerns. Behind Linda, a local news van pulled up, its broadcast antenna extending like a curious metallic stalk. A young, ambitious reporter, Sarah Chen, and her cameraman swiftly disembarked, their eyes immediately drawn to the confrontation. The roar of the excavator had attracted more than just the press. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to emerge from their homes, their faces a mix of curiosity, concern, and in some cases, a hesitant disapproval directed at Linda. Some exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the inherent cruelty of the situation, but few dared to openly challenge Linda Cartwright, whose iron fist had governed the HOA for over a decade. Rachel looked from Linda to the excavator, then to the growing crowd. A cold dread seeped into her, quickly replaced by a hot wave of defiance. She knew Linda's reputation for ruthless efficiency, for pushing through her agenda regardless of dissent. But what Linda, in her myopic pursuit of aesthetic purity, failed to comprehend was the depth of the woman she was now challenging. Rachel Monroe had spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of state politics, battling entrenched interests and championing the rights of the vulnerable. She had stared down powerful lobbyists, negotiated complex legislation, and commanded respect in rooms where lesser individuals crumbled. She was not merely a woman in a wheelchair. She was a force of nature, temporarily grounded, but far from broken. The excavator driver, a burly man with a disinterested expression, received a curt nod from Linda. The machine shuddered, its hydraulic arm lowering slowly, its claw positioned to rip into the very foundation of Rachel's independence. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. This was not a negotiation. This was an execution. Linda Cartwright had drawn a line in the sand, but she had no idea she had just declared war on a former governor. The quiet suburban street, usually a haven of quiet conformity, was about to become the epicenter of a storm that would shake the very foundations of power and privilege. The initial scrape of the excavator's claw against the concrete announced not just the destruction of a ramp, but the unwitting initiation of a profound reckoning. The crunch of concrete under the excavator's maw was a visceral sound, tearing not just at the ramp, but at the fabric of Oak Haven's carefully constructed civility. Rachel watched, a cold dread warring with a potent surge of outrage. This wasn't merely an act of petty vindictiveness. It was a public declaration of her perceived helplessness, a brutal stripping away of her autonomy. Linda Cartwright stood by, her expression a chilling blend of satisfaction and indifference, as if observing a routine maintenance task rather than the dismantling of a person's essential access. The local reporter, Sarah Chen, microphone held aloft, began her live broadcast, her voice carrying the urgency of breaking news. We are here live at Oak Haven Estates, where a shocking scene is unfolding. Her cameraman meticulously captured every splintering piece of wood and crumbling slab of concrete. The neighbors, who had initially watched from a respectful distance, began to murmur louder, their discomfort palpable. One older woman, Ms. Henderson, a longtime resident known for her quiet demeanor, wrung her hands. "This isn't right," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but her sentiment echoed in the faces around her. Many had known Rachel Monroe for years, admired her quiet strength even after her accident. They didn't know the full extent of her past, but they recognized injustice when they saw it. As the ramp was systematically reduced to rubble, a black, unassuming sedan pulled up, its arrival unnoticed amidst the cacophony. From it emerged a man of imposing stature, his silver hair neatly combed, his suit impeccably tailored. He surveyed the scene, his gaze first falling on the ruined ramp, then on Linda Cartwright, and finally settling on Rachel, a flicker of profound concern in his eyes. This was her brother, James Monroe, the current Secretary of State. James had received a frantic, terse call from Rachel moments before, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, simply stating, "They're tearing down my ramp. James, get here." He hadn't asked for details. He knew his sister well enough to understand the gravity of such a plea. James walked purposefully toward the scene, his presence instantly commanding attention. The murmurs from the neighbors ceased, replaced by a ripple of recognition. Sarah Chen, ever alert, turned her microphone towards him. "Excuse me, sir. Can you comment on what's happening here?" James ignored her, his eyes fixed on Linda Cartwright. "Madam," he stated, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that cut through the lingering noise of the excavator, which had paused, its work almost complete. "Are you responsible for this egregious act?" Linda, momentarily flustered by his unexpected appearance and air of authority, straightened herself. "I am Linda Cartwright, president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. And yes, this removal is being carried out under my directive. The structure was an aesthetic violation, and we have legal precedent." "Legal precedent," James interrupted, a dangerous edge entering his voice. He took a step closer, forcing Linda to instinctively take a small step back. "Are you aware that Rachel Monroe is my sister?" He gestured towards Rachel, who watched the exchange with a mixture of apprehension and a nascent glimmer of hope. "And are you aware of the considerable legal protections afforded to individuals with disabilities under state and federal law protections that your HOA, madam, is blatantly violating?" James's tone was no longer questioning but accusatory, a chilling indictment delivered with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. The Fair Housing Act, FHA, mandates that property owners, including HOAs, make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, and intentionally damaging or removing such accommodations can lead to serious legal consequences, including fines and lawsuits. Linda's carefully composed facade began to crack. She had dealt with disgruntled residents, but never someone with this level of apparent influence. "We sent multiple notices. She failed to comply. The board voted unanimously. This is a private community. We have our rules." Her voice, once so firm, now held a defensive tremor. "Your rules," James scoffed, a look of profound disgust on his face, "do not supersede the law of the land, not when they infringe upon fundamental human rights." He then turned to the excavator driver, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "You there, cease operations immediately. You are complicit in a potentially criminal act of property damage and a blatant violation of civil rights." The driver, intimidated by James's commanding presence, quickly shut down the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the tension in the air. Sarah Chen, the reporter, had been furiously taking notes. This was no ordinary HOA dispute. She recognized James Monroe. A quick search on her phone confirmed her suspicions. James Monroe, Secretary of State, brother of... She looked at Rachel, then back at James, a lightning bolt of realization striking her. Her jaw dropped. "Secretary Monroe, is this Rachel Monroe, the former governor?" she blurted out, her voice filled with incredulity. The question hung in the air, a bombshell in the quiet suburban street. James turned to Sarah, a calculated decision made in his eyes. He saw the opportunity, the leverage. "Indeed, she is," he announced, his voice carrying, ensuring everyone present, especially Linda, heard him loud and clear. "This is former Governor Rachel Monroe, who served this state with distinction for 2 terms before her accident necessitated a temporary withdrawal from public life. She dedicated her life to public service, including championing legislation for the disabled. And now she is being subjected to this degradation in her own home by an association that clearly believes itself above the law." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The whispers intensified, morphing from discomfort to shock and then to a nascent anger. Former Governor Rachel Monroe, the woman who had modernized infrastructure, overhauled the education system, and famously fought for disability rights during her tenure. The news spread like wildfire through the gathered neighbors. Some remembered her speeches, her presence, her undeniable impact on their lives. Now they saw her, frail yet resolute, her independence cruelly taken from her. The image of the powerful, respected governor contrasted starkly with the vulnerable woman in the wheelchair, her dignity under assault. This revelation transformed the incident from a local dispute into a state-level scandal. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, as amended, explicitly prohibits discrimination based on disability and requires reasonable accommodations. For an HOA to demolish a necessary accessibility ramp for a former governor, especially one known for advocating for disability rights, was not just a violation but a deeply embarrassing public relations nightmare waiting to unfold. Linda Cartwright's face drained of color, her composure finally shattering. The smug certainty vanished, replaced by a mixture of terror and disbelief. The former governor. The weight of her colossal misjudgment crashed down on her. She had not merely challenged an inconvenient resident. She had publicly humiliated a figure of immense public esteem and power. Her meticulously constructed world of HOA authority was crumbling faster than Rachel's ramp. She had mistaken Rachel's quiet retreat from public life for weakness, her disability for incapacitation. She had just picked a fight with a lioness, currently in repose, but still capable of a devastating roar. James, sensing Linda's unraveling, stepped closer. "Do you understand the gravity of what you have done, Ms. Cartwright? Not only have you committed a clear violation of federal and state disability rights laws, but you have done so to a person who has dedicated her life to upholding those very laws. This isn't just about a ramp. This is about a fundamental disregard for human dignity. And I assure you, the state will take this matter very seriously. You will be held accountable for every broken piece of concrete and for every shred of dignity you have tried to demolish." His words, though calmly delivered, carried the weight of state authority, a promise of swift and severe consequences. The implications rippled through the gathered crowd and, more significantly, through Sarah Chen's live broadcast, now being picked up by regional news networks. The story of a former governor, disabled and quietly living among them, having her essential support structure violently removed by a petty HOA, was explosive. It was a searing indictment of prejudice and abuse of power. The Oak Haven Estates, once a symbol of suburban tranquility, was about to become a national headline, a cautionary tale of unchecked authority and monumental misjudgment. The revelation of Rachel Monroe's past identity sent shockwaves through Oak Haven Estates and beyond. The local news report, initially just a small segment, exploded into a statewide sensation, then quickly escalated to national news. Sarah Chen, the reporter, found herself at the epicenter of a media frenzy. Her live feed replayed countless times, her name becoming synonymous with the scoop, the image of the proud, frail woman in her wheelchair, watching her independence literally crumble before her eyes, juxtaposed with the smug defiance of Linda Cartwright, ignited a furious public outcry. Social media buzzed with outrage. Hashtags like #Justice for Rachel and #HodiRanny trending across platforms. Calls poured into the state capitol, demanding action. Public figures, from disability rights advocates to former political rivals of Rachel, issued statements condemning the HOA's actions. The state's current governor, a protege of Rachel's from her days in public service, publicly denounced the incident as an appalling act of discrimination and a profound disrespect for the dignity of an esteemed public servant. He vowed to launch a full investigation and ensure justice was served. The state attorney general's office swiftly announced they were reviewing the case for potential civil rights violations and criminal charges related to property damage. The legal ramifications for Linda Cartwright and the HOA were mounting with terrifying speed. The Fair Housing Act, coupled with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, provides robust protections against discrimination and mandates reasonable accommodations. Willful destruction of an accommodation could lead to significant fines, legal action, and even imprisonment for those directly responsible. Linda Cartwright, previously unassailable in her HOA kingdom, found herself besieged. Her phone rang incessantly with angry calls from neighbors, some of whom had once supported her. Now horrified by the national spotlight, her email inbox overflowed with vitriolic messages. The other members of the HOA board, scrambling to distance themselves from the rapidly unfolding disaster, publicly disavowed Linda's unilateral decision-making, claiming they were misled or unaware of the full implications. The unanimous vote Linda had proudly touted earlier now seemed to dissolve into thin air. Many board members, fearing legal repercussions, began resigning en masse, leaving Linda isolated and exposed. Meanwhile, at Rachel's home, the atmosphere was a whirlwind of activity. James, ever the pragmatist, immediately set about securing legal counsel for his sister, contacting the state's top civil rights attorneys. He also coordinated with a construction company to begin planning the immediate reconstruction of the ramp, ensuring it would be built with even greater durability and aesthetic integration than before. A symbol of defiance and resilience, reporters camped outside Rachel's house, eager for any statement, any glimpse of the woman at the heart of the storm. Rachel, however, remained largely composed, her quiet dignity serving as a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around her. She gave a brief, dignified statement to the press, her voice steady despite the lingering tremor in her hands. "This is not just about a ramp," she reiterated, echoing her brother's earlier words. "This is about ensuring that no individual, regardless of their physical abilities, is ever stripped of their fundamental rights or subjected to such blatant disregard for their dignity. What happened here today is a symptom of a larger systemic issue that needs to be addressed. My hope is that this unfortunate incident serves as a catalyst for meaningful change, not just in Oak Haven Estates, but across our entire state." Her words, carefully chosen and delivered with the gravitas of a seasoned leader, resonated deeply with the public. Behind the scenes, James worked tirelessly, leveraging his connections within the state government. He initiated discussions with key legislative leaders, advocating for a review and strengthening of existing disability rights laws, particularly as they applied to homeowners associations. He argued that the current laws, while present, lack sufficient enforcement mechanisms and penalties to deter such flagrant abuses of power. He cited Rachel's case as a prime example of how easily a powerful HOA president could exploit ambiguities and lack of oversight to discriminate against vulnerable residents. The state Senate Majority Leader, a close friend of James's and a former colleague of Rachel's, immediately expressed support for a legislative overhaul. This was not just a case of property damage, but a systemic challenge to the rights of disabled individuals within private communities. The revelation of Rachel's identity also stirred a wave of introspection within the Oak Haven Estates community itself. Many residents who had remained silent out of fear of Linda's retaliation now felt empowered to speak out. Stories began to emerge of Linda's previous abuses of power, arbitrary fines, draconian enforcement of minor infractions, and a general pattern of intimidation that had stifled dissent and fostered an atmosphere of fear. Neighbors, who had passively allowed Linda to dictate their lives, now felt a collective surge of shame and anger. A petition calling for Linda's immediate removal and a complete overhaul of the HOA's governance structure circulated rapidly, gaining hundreds of signatures in a matter of hours. Linda Cartwright, cornered and facing an avalanche of legal and public condemnation, barricaded herself in her home, refusing to answer calls or open her door. Her once unshakable confidence had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, panicked realization that her petty tyranny had inadvertently unleashed a force far beyond her control. The very system she had manipulated for her own ends was now turning against her with a vengeance. She had believed herself untouchable, but the wheels of justice, once set in motion by a former governor's quiet resilience, were now grinding inexorably towards her. The irony was palpable in her attempt to erase Rachel's presence. She had inadvertently cemented Rachel's legacy and exposed her own egregious abuse of power to the entire world. The state's legal framework for HOAs, often a complex web of bylaws and state statutes, was now under intense scrutiny, with Rachel's case highlighting the potential for abuse when proper oversight is absent. The quiet suburban street, once a bastion of carefully manicured lawns and hushed conformity, had become a crucible, forging a new reality. The legal and political machinery, ignited by the heartless demolition of Rachel Monroe's ramp, now churned with an inexorable force, reshaping not just the pristine facade of Oak Haven Estates, but the very fabric of disability rights across the state. Linda Cartwright, the self-appointed Empress of Oak Haven, found her meticulously constructed empire crumbling around her, not with a gentle decay, but with the brutal, thunderous collapse of public condemnation and the unyielding weight of the law. The state attorney general's office, inundated with a torrent of furious calls, emails, and social media petitions, and armed with Sarah Chen's widely broadcast footage and a deluge of our eyewitness testimonies, had launched a formal and aggressive investigation into the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. It was a swift, meticulous process, pulling back the veneer of respectability to reveal a rot that had festered for years. Investigators unearthed a shocking pattern of discriminatory practices, arbitrary and excessive fines levied for minor infractions, draconian rules enforced with selective cruelty, and a pervasive culture of intimidation fostered by Linda. Residents, long silenced by fear of retaliation, now found their voices, empowered by Rachel Monroe's quiet courage. Their testimonies poured in, each story a damning indictment, collectively painting a chilling portrait of an HOA run not as a community service, but as Linda Cartwright's personal fiefdom, her authority unchecked, her decisions often veering into outright harassment and abuse of power. The sheer volume and consistency of the complaints left no room for doubt. Within a mere matter of weeks, formal charges were filed against Linda Cartwright, felony property damage, multiple counts of civil rights violations under both state and federal statutes, and a dizzying litany of financial improprieties discovered during an emergency audit of HOA funds. The district attorney, recognizing the immense public interest and the potential for a landmark case, pursued the charges with an almost unprecedented zeal. The impending trial was not just a local legal proceeding, it was a national spectacle, a moral referendum on prejudice and unchecked authority. The trial itself was a media circus, attracting national news crews and legal analysts. Linda, once the picture of polished composure, appeared utterly shattered. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair was now disheveled. Her expensive suits seemed to hang loosely on her trembling frame, and her eyes, once glinting with self-righteous certainty, were now clouded with a desperate, panicked fear. She was a stark, almost tragic, contrast to the imperious figure she had once been. Her legal defense, a desperate attempt to portray Rachel as a troublemaker, and the HOA's actions as merely enforcing covenants, crumbled under the weight of irrefutable video evidence, meticulously documented financial irregularities, and the powerful, articulate testimonies of Rachel Monroe and her brother, James. Rachel, addressing the court from her wheelchair, commanded the room with the same quiet authority that had once filled legislative chambers and captivated rally crowds. Her voice, though softer than in her gubernatorial days, carried the unmistakable resonance of truth and conviction. She spoke not of vengeance, but of justice, not of personal slight, but of the fundamental right to dignity and accessibility for all. She emphasized the profound psychological impact of having one's independence so cruelly snatched away, the agonizing feeling of being deemed inconvenient in one's own home. Her words, delivered with a calm, unwavering resolve, resonated deeply with the jury, painting a vivid picture of the human cost of prejudice. James, testifying as an expert on state law and as a direct witness to the demolition, systematically dismantled the defense's arguments, his legal acumen and commanding presence undeniable. The verdict was swift and unequivocal, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in a collective gasp, followed by a wave of relieved murmurs. The sentencing, delivered by a stern and unyielding judge, sent a tremor through the legal community and beyond. Linda Cartwright was sentenced to a significant term in state prison, a shocking and unprecedented outcome for an HOA president. particularly for charges stemming from what many initially dismissed as a neighborly dispute. The message was clear, resounding across the state and the nation: abuse of power, especially when it targets vulnerable populations, would not be tolerated. Beyond Linda's personal downfall, the Oak Haven Estates HOA itself faced a monumental reckoning. A class action lawsuit, initiated by multiple residents and expertly managed by Rachel's high-powered legal team, systematically dismantled the existing power structure. The lawsuit successfully dissolved the existing HOA board, declared its previous actions null and void, and paved the way for a completely new, democratically elected governance structure. The community, once stifled by fear and resentment, began a painful but necessary process of healing and rebuilding trust. Its outdated, discriminatory bylaws were incinerated and rewritten from the ground up, now prioritizing inclusivity, transparency, and, critically, explicit respect for all residents, particularly those with disabilities. In a powerful act of symbolic justice, a significant portion of the lawsuit's substantial financial settlement was allocated to establishing a perpetual community fund. This fund was dedicated exclusively to accessibility improvements for all residents in need, a beautiful and poignant inversion of the HOA's original destructive act, turning the weapon of prejudice into a tool of universal empowerment. The ripple effect of Rachel's stand extended far beyond the manicured lawns of Oak Haven. James Monroe, fueled by the immense public outcry and his sister's compelling testimony, seized the moment. He spearheaded a bipartisan legislative initiative that quickly became known as the Rachel Monroe Accessibility and Dignity Act. This comprehensive bill, drafted with Rachel's direct input and drawing on her decades of experience in public service, was a legislative masterpiece designed to fortify existing disability rights laws and introduce stringent new protections. It mandated clearer, unambiguous guidelines for HOAs regarding accessibility modifications, leaving no room for subjective interpretations or discriminatory loopholes. It established robust enforcement mechanisms, ensuring that violations would be swiftly addressed, and crucially, introduced severe penalties, both civil and criminal, for discriminatory practices. Furthermore, it created a dedicated state oversight committee, specifically tasked with mediating disputes between residents with disabilities and HOAs, ensuring that no one else would ever again face the agonizing, isolating battle Rachel had endured. This committee was to be a beacon of fairness, a proactive force for justice. The legislative process, usually a labyrinth of political maneuvering and slow deliberations, was remarkably swift, propelled by an unprecedented wave of public support and a rare, genuine bipartisan consensus. News of Rachel's ordeal had galvanized lawmakers across the political spectrum, transcending partisan divides. The act passed both houses of the state legislature with overwhelming majorities, a testament to its urgent necessity. It was signed into law by the current governor in a historic ceremony at the state capitol, a deeply symbolic event. Rachel Monroe herself was present, a powerful figure of resilience and legislative triumph, a living embodiment of the very rights the act sought to protect. The signing ceremony was a deeply poignant moment, brimming with emotion. Rachel, seated in her customized wheelchair, a newly constructed, beautifully integrated ramp now serving as her dignified path to the podium, received a thunderous, prolonged standing ovation from the assembled dignitaries, lawmakers, and members of the public. She spoke briefly, her voice clear and resonant, not of personal victory, but of a collective step forward for human rights, a testament to the power of a community united against injustice. This act, she declared, her eyes sweeping across the assembly, brimming with a quiet pride, is a testament to the fact that prejudice, no matter how deeply ingrained, can be overcome. It ensures that dignity is not a privilege to be granted or denied, but an inherent, inalienable right, and that no citizen will ever again be considered inconvenient for simply seeking equal access to their own home, to their own lives. Her words, broadcast live, echoed across the state, inspiring countless individuals and bringing tears to many eyes. The changes wrought by Rachel's unwavering stand were truly transformative. Across the state, HOAs, now acutely aware of the potential legal and financial repercussions, meticulously reviewed and revised their policies, fearful of suffering the same catastrophic fate as Oak Haven estates. Architectural firms and developers, now understanding the legal and ethical imperative, began integrating universal design principles into new constructions, recognizing that accessibility was not merely an afterthought or an added cost, but a fundamental requirement, an integral part of modern, equitable living spaces. The Rachel Monroe Act quickly became a national model, inspiring similar legislative efforts in other states, gradually dismantling barriers for people with disabilities across the country and fostering a broader cultural shift towards inclusivity. Rachel Monroe, who had quietly retreated from public life to convalesce and find a new rhythm in her altered circumstances, inadvertently found herself a powerful, influential advocate once more. She graciously accepted a position on the newly formed State Oversight Committee. Her vast experience in governance, her profound understanding of policy, and her unwavering moral compass guiding its mission to uphold the new law. She became a sought-after speaker, her story a compelling narrative of adversity transformed into monumental change, her personal struggle becoming a catalyst for systemic reform. Her home in Oak Haven, once a target of senseless destruction, became a potent symbol of victory. The new, beautifully designed ramp, a permanent, tangible testament to the fact that even the most deeply ingrained prejudices could be overcome by courage and conviction. The Oak Haven Estates community, purged of Linda's corrosive influence, began to flourish. Neighbors, having witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of unchecked power and having experienced the shared trauma and subsequent triumph, embraced a new spirit of communal responsibility and empathy. The annual HOA meetings, once tense, acrimonious affairs dominated by fear, became forums for genuine dialogue, collaborative problem-solving, and shared vision. The residents, who had once passively allowed a power-hungry individual to label one of their own an inconvenient resident, now celebrated the woman who had, through her quiet fortitude and unyielding spirit, become their unlikely savior, ushering in an era of true inclusivity, respect, and communal strength. Rachel Monroe's legacy, far from being diminished by her accident or her temporary withdrawal from public life, soared to new, unanticipated heights, forever etched not only in the laws of the land, but also in the hearts and minds of the people she had, in two distinct and powerful phases of her life, so profoundly served. Her fight was not just for a ramp, it was for the fundamental human right to live with dignity. What began as a brazen act of cruelty against a disabled resident ignited a firestorm that exposed deep-seated prejudice and sparked monumental change. Rachel Monroe's resilience proved that dignity cannot be demolished, and that true power lies in standing up for fundamental rights. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. If this story moved you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more inspiring narratives.